Well, hello everyone. David F here, and this is going to be an open mic after show for the Kent Hovind debate with Jordan from Reasons to Doubt. Welcome, and thank you all so much for joining us. A link to join the chat is in the sidebar chat. I have it pinned right there, so feel free to come on in. The water is fine. Just a brief announcement: I will be debating Tangelo and Philip Williams tomorrow on Standing for Truth's channel. It'll be on the topic of whether or not the Noah's Ark was found on Mount Ararat, and I am putting a link to that in the cyber chat right now. So join me tomorrow for a debate and, of course, another after show. So welcome everyone, and we have quite a few people in the back, so let's bring them in. Hello, Jorge. How are you?
Howdy.
Hello. Hi. So, how do you guys think the debate went?
I'll be honest, I didn't watch it. Sorry, I just came in here because Leo's here. I guess. We're just kidding. It's because I saw it was live. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yep, it's not a problem. Leo, what do you think of the debate?
I only caught like the last 20 minutes of it because I had some family over, but I'm sure it was a typical Kent Hovind debate.
Yep, Kent Hovind just his usual lies and gish gallops and misrepresenting the science. Jordan from Reasons to Doubt said he is going to be coming over in a minute or so and will be hopping on. So, Jorge, what did you think?
I did not notice a conversation about the age of the Earth in this debate about the age of the Earth.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, and I have pretty much the same feelings that this debate was about everything but the original topic.
Yeah, Kent Hovind wanted to talk about education so much. It was. I would say it was depressing if it wasn't Kent Hovind in the debate.
Yeah, exactly. But that's just typical Kent Hovind for you. Irrational Empiricist, hello. What do you think?
I think Kent pretty much represented all of geology and cosmology, but yeah.
Yep. Price, what do you think?
I think that Kent was, as usual, he's rhetorically compelling with his jokes and his jabs and stuff like that. But I thought Jordan did really well in terms of educating people. I thought that he did really good in his opening statement. I haven't seen like the levels of radioactivity. And, well, I've seen the heat quantified if we're talking about accelerated radioactive decay. I've seen the heat quantified before, but I hadn't seen the radioactivity quantified. So one of the questions I wanted to ask him was, where he got that info from, because I thought that was cool.
I wanted to comment just really quickly. I'm seeing a bunch of Kent Hovindites in the chat. Links in there. Why don't you come on in and tell us what science we misrepresented or denying?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, just a reminder, you can fit 10 people in here, right?
Yes,
yeah, we've got 4 more
slots. 10 people.
Okay,
so
just a reminder. Otherwise, I'd leave.
There's plenty of room, so feel free to come on in. Well, hello, Danny. How are you?
Hey, guys.
Oh,
Hey,
Danny boy.
Oh, Danny.
Oh my God, Danny's in here.
The sun is calling.
Hey, Leo, good luck tomorrow.
Oh,
Yep.
it's gonna be fun. It's
Oh,
gonna be fun.
Yeah, are you debating tomorrow?
Yes, I am.
Yep. He is debating Smokey and CJ, and it will be Leo and Rib.
Steve
Tiger.
Ryan from Cider and Port. We're debating
Leo.
socialism and capitalism.
Oh, very nice. So, Leo, what time is that debate?
7
8
p.m.
p.m.
Central Standard Time on Modern Day Debate.
Oh man, that sucks because I have another debate at that time on Standing for Truth's channel. So
Hey, it's all good. It'll be on YouTube for a while, so
yeah. So feel free to perhaps we'll have
Until the end, Leo, unless it gets deleted, that video is going to be online way after you're dead.
Leo, have you debated CJ before?
no.
He's
Not
actually
concerned about it though.
Oh, I think he's actually a pretty good interlocutor.
He's a decent interlocutor, yeah, but when it comes to this topic, his points are standard conservative talking point, so it's not anything I haven't heard 1,500,000 billion times.
Yep.
It's easy to debate the topic of socialism with somebody who's never read Marxist theory.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and here's Jordan right now. Hello, Jordan.
Hey, Jordan.
Hey, so Jordan, what did you think of the overall debates?
I thought it was good. I mean, I know Kent gets a bad rap, but I always have fun talking to him. So
yeah, I have fun talking to him too. He seems to be a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, well, aren't we all?
Yep.
But overall, I thought it went pretty well. I tried out my arguments on my wife first to make sure that they weren't too technical. She's usually my gay. Yeah, I. Let's get your mind out of the gutter, okay? We were only naked for like half of it, you know.
It was the second half, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's good.
We've got one more spot, and I would love like Orient Express or Hate Love Nothing to come in here and just tell us how we all misrepresent the science and everything like that. Because hey, if I misrepresenting the science, you should be able to tell me that, and I want to know.
Leo, I will raise that and and have two creationists come in here because I'll leave. You get to have double the fun.
Yep. So come on in, creationists. Don't be afraid to come on in and challenge us. The water is fine. We're not going to bite. Well, no. I might bite, but the rest of you won't.
This is not an echo chamber, despite despite creationist claims or accusations. I should say.
So Jordan, my take on the debate was that you guys didn't talk about the age of the Earth. Do you think that's a good critique of the debate?
Yeah, so hold on, guys, real quick. Archangelo is here, so welcome, Archangelo.
At least we got somebody.
For those of you who don't know, I am debating Archangelo and Philip Williams tomorrow. Archangelo, hello, and I am really looking forward to our debate tomorrow.
Yes, hello, guys. I'm a little bit sleepy right now, but...
Are you underwater right now?
Yeah, I got
his mic is really low for me, at least. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to turn up your mic.
Yeah, it's a little hard. It's a little hard to hear.
It sounds very
like a lot of static.
I mean, we can like understand you a little bit, but it's just really like if you're listening to somebody speak from like really, really far away,
or like driving in a car or something.
Is it better now? Better now?
A little bit.
Really.
Is it better now?
I'm not really noticing much of it.
He's coming in clear. It doesn't sound as distant. I think it's probably decent.
Yeah. Archangelo, try going back out and coming back in, because I'm having a hard time hearing you.
It sounds like the, I don't know what you call it, the dongle or whatever it is. It almost sounds like it's not plugged in all the way.
That could be.
Yeah.
By the way, I did see Leo's physics video, and it was good. I mean, I think, and partially it's because like I've taken a lot of math, is that I think it might be a little
better now.
Much better.
Yes.
Better now.
Yes, much better.
Yeah, there we go.
Anyway, were you staying immutable? Hit me with your credit.
Your video sucks. Just kidding. It was good. I didn't see it yet.
One thing I think you could have touched on that might have given a little more clarity is kind of a basic idea of like how complex multiplication is different from normal multiplication. Number two, the fact that like what a complex valued function is.
I did touch on what a complex valued function is. I didn't really want to go much into more than just surface level, just because I didn't want like a 50-minute video.
Yeah. The other thing too, and one thing I'm surprised you didn't mention, and maybe you did and I just missed it, but it's the fact that that like the square of a complex function, so like the magnitude of psi squared is equal to psi times psi star.
Yeah. I was thinking about touching on that in the next video, just because the way that that's generally represented is psi or psi star psi, with bracket notation and everything, which I will probably get a little bit more into in the wave function collapse video. But It took me probably a week and a half, 2 weeks to get this video up, and the reason is because I was trying to figure out what I do want to, because there's so much that you can talk about when it comes to this subject, and I didn't want to be too technical, but I didn't want to be so non-technical that I'm actually skimming over a lot of the important parts. So that was probably the hardest part for me, was figuring out that fine balance about technical enough that it's capturing what's going on, but not so technical that people can't understand it.
Well, so I mean, like when you cover wave function collapse, then are you going to have to explain like what the span of a vector space is? Or are you not going to go that far into?
I don't mean to interrupt, but we have Jordan here. If you guys want to talk about the debate we just had instead of critiquing Leo's video.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just asking.
Of course, very well that after shows for debates usually end up going anywhere.
If you guys want to talk about the video,
I had questions for Jordan, so.
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Leo's video some other time.
Sorry, we're kind of excluding you all, even though that Jorge is a physics person.
Yeah.
So you asked, I think, whether we should have actually talked about the age of the Earth more.
Yeah, I noticed. I didn't hear much age of the Earth talk from him.
Yeah, so he did go off on some tangents like he usually does, evolution of, amoeba and whatever. It's like that has nothing to do with it. And then he's like, I just basically try to ignore that part and focus on the physics and stuff like that. But that's what you're going to get. You know what you're getting into, so.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, when it comes to Kent, whatever the topic, when you pick a topic to debate with Kent, expect to just talk about evolution. It doesn't matter what the topic is. You're going to be discussing evolution.
Yeah, and of course the 6 levels of evolution.
I don't think he did that this time.
Well, I can't believe it. You think that a mosquito is related to a pine tree.
I mean,
yeah, and you're saying that it's a bacteria. That's ridiculous.
Fucking Kent. That guy just cracks me.
So I did want to say one thing, Jordan. Thank you for clarifying the real laws of thermodynamics and not the ones described in the textbooks. I was so happy to see you give the proper definitions of that. So thank you.
Wait, okay. So now I gotta ask a question. Okay, why are the laws of thermodynamics different in the textbook than the one? You would think they would write the one, the accurate ones.
So
if I could answer that real quick. So the thing is with high school and middle school level textbooks, they're not going to be able to comprehend the complex mathematical equations behind the laws of thermodynamics. So they basically have
thermodynamics.
I mean, generally, yes, I agree with you, but I'm pretty sure there's that one smart kid that already knows. Never mind, but I get the point.
Well, I mean, so thermodynamics, I'm a mechanical engineer, and that was an entire course. Just thermodynamics, and you can go way more than just that one course, right? So, but the point of teaching it to high school students isn't so that they can do thermodynamics equations. They're not going to do that. It's to get them the gist of it. And if you use complexity, that gets you the gist. But the problem with is trying to say your gist and then apply it to, then the age of the universe is this. Well, you need more than the gist there.
So another question I have is that do they teach you the actual laws in a college course?
Yeah.
Or are they still simplified? And you need to go to the higher, classes to get the actual laws.
So the further and further you go, the less they dumb it down, if that makes sense, because you're equipped with better tools in order to understand what's going on. If I'm trying to teach, like my daughter earlier today is learning about atomic nuclei. It's not going to help her if I pull out my reactor physics textbook and here's the actual laws that are governing. That's not going to help her. So
yeah, exactly.
I mean,
barely understand.
If I can say, if she's your daughter, she has your genes, she'll understand them. She'll understand them intuitively.
So yeah, it's just the nature of the beast. You have progressive understanding as you go on. If you get to the undergraduate level, you're going to get more of like the actual laws of thermodynamics, and it's not complexity. It's like it's math. Like
that being said, if you want to take an undergrad level of physics, you got to take all the calculus level math courses first, because if you don't understand calculus, you're not going to understand anything in physics.
Well, not just calculus, but linear algebra as well.
Linear algebra is easy though.
And
linear algebra is a breeze. It really is. Go ahead, Emil.
Okay.
Yeah. So next semester, when I need help with my math, I know exactly who to ask for my math tutor.
Yeah.
I think a few physicists might agree with me when I say that you haven't actually learned physics until you've taken at least partial differential equations.
Or calculus 1, or calculus 1.
Well,
it depends on the level of physics you're learning.
Yeah.
By the way, what are you? Sorry, Jordan. What are you again? An electrical engineer or from?
No. See, electrical engineers deal in magic. Electricity is pure magic. That's yeah. It's you.
No, repeat that again.
Electrical engineers deal with magic. I'm a
no. What do you do? Not I heard that.
I'm a mechanical and nuclear engineer. So.
Oh wow. Hey, David.
Yes.
Where do you find? Where do you find these Einstein level people?
I wouldn't go that far. I have some really smart professors. If you want to talk to science, like.
I mean, just I don't know. Like I've
had I've had uni professors before that make like addition way more complicated than it needs to be, and part of that's because addition at its core is really complicated. You start trying to explain what a quotient thing is, and goddamn freaking scalar field is. God, Jesus. Look.
I'm not religious.
Please,
scalar fields are easier than vector fields, I think.
Yeah, but they're. Please, if I hear the quotient ring another time this week.
We as so me and my engineering friends, one of our friends was a math major, pure math, like theoretical math.
Oh shit.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and we used to have a lot of fun messing with her because she'd be like, I'm doing this paper on the infinitude of primes. We're like, yeah, I mean, of course there's infinity primes. She's like, what? It's like, yeah, just keep counting. Like, just keep going. Like, there's infinity numbers.
You'll get there eventually.
You'll get there, right? Exactly. She's like, math doesn't like that. I was like,
So Jordan, if I could ask you another question real quick, you might have a bias on this, but would you consider that kind of engineering at least to be related to science at least, or like what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, what do you mean by related to science? I mean, obviously we're using scientific understanding. Engineering is the discipline of applying scientific understanding to real world problems, right? So
okay.
Now are you asking like, do I consider myself a scientist? Is that what you're asking?
Like I guess I was more considering, is it a true science, or is it more just an application of science?
Which is science?
Yeah, I don't know.
Does it really matter?
Yeah, I'd say it probably doesn't really matter.
I would call it science because, I mean, yeah, you do have engineers working at, say, the Large Hadron Collider, but the people who are actually who are doing the runs and interpreting everything and running the calculations are theoretical physicists, but they're still applying what they learned to the real world to understand. Like, they're scientists.
And there are also engineers who are research engineers. So it's what I do is definitely not science. But
stop being modest.
I don't know. I mean,
so Jordan, let me ask you: why are you an atheist?
Intentional. Okay. Did you come in here just to ask that?
It's cool.
He can't ask that.
He can ask that. I'm perfect.
Fair enough. Sorry.
That's a good question.
Yeah. So I can go into my entire history if you want, but the short answer is I was a young Earth creationist, and then I was presented evidence that led me to believe that I was wrong about that. And that led kind of like a cascading effect. It's like, okay, well, if that's not true, then where does God fit in? Maybe he fits in, like, maybe it's like a theistic evolutionist thing. And then I found more and like, okay, that doesn't work anymore. And it kind of was like a fighting retreat with God going further and further back. And then eventually I got to the point where I didn't need God at all. It's kind of like a deist. And then one day I realized, you know what? I don't think I believe in God anymore. guess I'm an atheist, you know.
So how can you explain our existence without a creator?
So I think it's important to keep in mind that I don't know doesn't equal God, and that I don't need to have certainty about something. Certainty doesn't mean you're right. You can have a lot of certainty in something you're wrong about. So I don't know what happened prior to the Big Bang. What I do know is what happened afterwards, and I see no reason that I have to suppose a deity in order to fill that hole.
So you are a mechanical engineer. What do you have an understanding what mechanics and engineering has to do with biology?
Well, depending on your field of biology, I think it can relate or not, but I'm definitely not a biologist. I need a shirt with like I am not, and just listing all of the things that I'm not.
That would be a question more for either Mutable or David.
They're fairly distantly related, and that really depends on what kind of, biological engineer you're asking. Are you wanting to cultivate something that's going to tear the hell out of, that's going to tear apart, plant cell walls to use them as metabolic fuel? There's a lot of different ways you can approach that question, but they're not. I wouldn't consider them at least engineering in the sense that engineering is conventionally referred to under.
I would agree.
So Jordan, if you see a process where in an assembly process to make a machine, when a subpart is made and that subpart is tested in regards of it is functional or not, and if it's not functional, it is either recycled or discarded. And if it is tested to be functional and properly made in order to be incorporated in the machine complex, when you see that process, do you think that process requires foreknowledge about how that part is correct and when it is not correct?
So when I see that process done in a factory, then certainly. When I see that process done on a manufacturing line, but there's a that doesn't mean that you can apply that without any modification to evolution, for example.
I'm not talking about evolution. I am talking that precisely that kind of process you see in the assembly and the biogenesis of the ribosome, which is a core protein in the making of life.
Okay.
And there, in the assembly of the subunits of the ribosome, happens exactly that kind of process, where when one protein or ribosomal RNA is synthesized, then there is a process prior to incorporating that part in the maturation of the ribosome, that it is tested, literally tested through signaling. And there are assembly proteins, they are named assembly factors, which actually somehow they can identify if that subunit is correctly synthesized or not. And that mechanism had to emerge prior when life began, because the ribosome is actually a life essential process. So do you have just chance as an alternative, or chemical reactions as an alternative to intelligent design? So would you think that it is reasonable to say that somehow unguided, non-intelligent reactions could have come up with that process to test actually a subunit of the ribosome?
So I'm not a biologist, so if you want to dig into the weeds, maybe someone else in the chat is good for that. However,
well, you don't need to be. I'm just talking from a mechanical.
You're going to let Jordan answer your question?
What I can answer.
Leo, you are not talking with him. I am. So.
Yeah, but you're not letting Jordan answer your question. You asked him a question, he went to answer, and then you jumped right on him.
This is just a mechanical issue. That's why I'm asking you. You don't have to be a biologist in order to actually understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you do.
So, the biology aside, what I can say is that you can't look at, okay, this class of things has this kind of trait, and it is like this. This other class of things has a similar trait. That does not imply that they have this other trait in common. I believe that's the fallacy of composition, but I could be wrong. But saying that because class A has traits, XYZ, and class B has trait X, that doesn't mean that class B has traits Y and Z as well. So it's fallacious for you to say, because you've got this observation in a factory and you see something that is superficially similar in nature, that therefore there's intention. You need to do more work.
Right.
Now,
I
as to like the
disagree with
details,
you. Like,
okay, but as to the details,
I disagree with you. Okay, I disagree with you because, for example, Herschel, he says, if the analogy of two phenomena be very close and striking, while at the same time the cause of one is very obvious, it becomes scarcely possible to refuse to admit the action of an analogous cause in the other, tough not so obvious to itself. So I would say, if you see in an engineering process the implementation of a test drive, then you can make the analogy to biology and say, if we see the same test drive in biology and there was no evolution, then probably intelligence had to be involved also to implement that process.
That's still the analogy position because it's ignoring what it's ignoring.
I'm asking Jordan. I'm not asking you, Immutable.
We're all friends here, man.
Hold on. Everybody stop. Everybody stop. Quick question for the host. David, you there?
Sorry, I was on mute.
I had a quick question for you. This is an open mic, right?
Yes, and
okay. Go ahead, Immutable.
Yeah, Tangelo, it's called an open mic. There's like, if I'm not mistaken, 8 people in here, so I can talk whenever I damn well please.
Yep. Okay. A little bit.
Boo!
That's what he does. He runs.
You can ignore me if you want to, but I'm not going to take this whole bitch fit from Otangelo.
Well, and I'm glad he left because I didn't want this entire discussion to go from the debate that Jordan had into a fucking irreducible complexity argument that he's been corrected on time and again by several individuals, many of which have fucking PhDs in the field, and he still pushes the same oft-refuted bullshit time and again. So I'm glad.
I just wanted to.
And here's the thing with irreducible complexity. This is a hypothesis that can be tested using the scientific method. The observation is organisms are complex. Hypothesis, they can't evolve because they're too complex. But then we can see organisms and structures that are irreducibly complex, like HIV, evolving right before our eyes. And that hypothesis, the irreducible complexity, is busted right then and there.
Can I say something really quick?
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, what I was trying to say is that the only reason Otangelo came in here is is a way to get a gotcha on Jordan, right? Because he asked him a question and then Jordan is like, well, I don't know much biology. Ask someone else.
Well, you don't need to know the biology. Yes, you do.
And the fallacy you're looking for is false equivalence fallacy.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
an argument from analogy. So I believe Immutable wanted to say something.
Yeah, the issue for a couple minutes. Angelo, and it would have gone over his head because he's dense as a pound of freaking lead anyway. Is
pretty dense.
That if we have two objects that have similar properties, okay, that's fine. There's definitely more objects that have different properties, right? But if you know for a fact that some object with this property has only one specific point of origin, right? That mainly, it has to be produced by, a human being acting on it in a special kind of way. Then no, it isn't natural to assume that the other object had to, originate from a similar type of cause.
Exactly.
Especially if materials are very different. In this case, you're comparing, the very complex components of a cell, like lipid membranes and nucleic acids and things of the like, to things that are made of, very well organized crystalline structures and, very, very cleanly defined, parameters that a machine operates.
Jordan,
can I jump in for a quick second?
Go right ahead.
Sure.
Okay, actually, let me get in line behind Jordan because I see he had something that he wanted to say right there. And then after that, Jordan, if you don't mind, I had a couple of quick questions for you.
All I was going to say is it's very common for creationists and other kind of conspiracy theorist type thinking to be like be an inch deep but a mile wide, and
I like that.
Yeah, so they want to say like, oh, you're a mechanical engineer. Well, let me ask you an in-depth question about biology. I don't know, dude. I'm not a biologist. Aha! Like,
yeah,
that's not how experts use.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I think that's why I was like, why the hell did you ask him that? Because I kind of felt like that's where he was going.
So, Grace, you had a question?
Grace?
Yeah, I have a couple if you'll indulge me. So the first thing I wanted to say, though, is that I was happy with you bringing up the example of how detectives go about their investigations.
Yeah.
I think that that's really good to get into that, because I think that has some repercussions in terms of how we're understanding science and how confident we can be in science and things like that. So I think that you going in that direction is really good. That aside, you talked about the levels of radioactivity that result from accelerated radioactive decay. And I've never seen that quantified before until your opening presentation. So I was just wondering where you got that figure from.
Okay, so the full answer to that is basically I look at the Oklo phenomena, which I showed some math, and I can email you all the calculations if you're interested. But
yes, please.
Sure. If you shoot me your email address, I'd be happy to send it to you. And I think my contact info might be on the slide in the presentation. But my email address is jordan9485@gmail.com. There you go, internet. So, anyways, yeah. So, anyways, the way it works is the Oklo phenomena gives us like a limit of 1.6 billion years. It's close to 2, whatever it is. I use that number. So basically, you have to have had that much decay going on. And then in order to get the Oklo phenomena with a young Earth, you have to compress that decay into some period of time. So I assume that all of that decay happened during the flood because that's a common creationist answer. And so I compress the 2 billion years of decay into 1 year of decay, I think it is. Maybe it's 6 months, whatever number I use. And that gives me a ratio of the actual half-life to what this accelerated half-life would be. And then I use that accelerated half-life because if you increase to figure out the increase in activity, and the more activity you have, the lower half-life means more radioactivity. So then I just look at how much radioactivity you have from tritium in your water and potassium-40 in your bananas and whatever, and then I just multiply it by that ratio. It's really back of the envelope. It's going to be more complicated than that, but it kind of gives you an order of magnitude idea. And then the heat one.
I had a question. Go ahead.
No, the heat one was just multiplying that ratio by the heat production. That's it.
Yes. Okay. My second one is about thermodynamics. So the idea of disequilibrium coming out of total equilibrium as a violation of the second law. My understanding of this, because I'm basically dependent on how Carroll talks about this. And from what I'm understanding, because thermodynamics is statistically based. Yeah, we're talking Sean Carroll. So we're talking about, like the whole conversation that leads into things like Boltzmann brains and understanding cosmology in terms of like, the Big Bang being a kind of thermal fluctuation. And so the way that I'm understanding that is that this can take place because thermodynamics is fundamentally based upon a statistical foundation. And I want to get your thoughts about whether or not that is an appropriate interpretation of what they're saying. Basically, the idea being that if you run it out long enough, because it's statistically based, you can inevitably get to a situation where you get disequilibrium from a state of total equilibrium. Is that accurate or is that off?
So it is true that the second law of thermodynamics is stochastic, meaning it's statistical. So you can have fluctuations and temporary reversals. It's just that an increase of entropy is overwhelmingly more likely than a decrease. It was observed back in the heyday of thermodynamic research that if you had things at equilibrium, there'd be fluctuations, and every once in a while you get a big fluctuation for something else. And that's where the Boltzmann brain. Basically, you could have a fluctuation that would bring about a disembodied brain, and it would then disappear because it's just a brain, right? So that's what that is. That is not what cosmologists say led to the Big Bang today, precisely because it would have a Boltzmann brain problem.
Yep.
That being that you'd be far and away more likely with that naive kind of model to have a brain show up than a person, and you'd be far more likely to have just the Earth show up than the whole universe or whatever.
Exactly.
So you and apply. Now it's possible. I guess you can't rule out necessarily that we just happen to be in this extremely unlikely scenario. But applying the law of mediocrity, where you don't assume that you're extremely special, you assume you're not special because you're probably not. Because most things aren't special. Then you have to do more physics. So actual cosmology. So if your model has a Boltzmann brain problem, that's a problem for your model.
Yes,
I think that probably answers your question.
So I just a little bit. I want to throw back at that one and then just to listen to your rejoinder, because I read Carroll's paper on Boltzmann brains, and his idea is that he wants to argue that you don't get to these Boltzmann brains because the manifestation of the brain is actually a lot less probable than was classically considered. So it seems like from my interpretation, it seems like he's going for this, and the objection that you raised to it, he's trying to argue that actually it doesn't result in a Boltzmann brain because the production of such things is just astronomically improbable.
So I certainly would defer to Sean Carroll on physics because he knows way more than I do. My understanding is that whether or not a particular model has a Boltzmann brain problem is a model-dependent question. So some models may and some models wouldn't. I haven't read that paper, so perhaps that says differently.
Yeah, when I send you an email, I'll definitely include it so that way you can check it out. Because I'm still learning in my physics, and so I want to make sure that the things that I'm gathering from my sources, I'm understanding them appropriately. The last thing I had for you is a totally irrelevant question, but you brought it up a couple of times when you were talking about what you guys talk about on Reason to Doubt, which is the nature of the Gospels, whether or not we should understand them as historical or put them in the genre of biography. And I was just curious what your personal opinion is about that.
So basically, my understanding of the Gospels is that they were four anonymous. They were written anonymously, with the earliest being about 60 or 70 CE and the latest being about 90 CE. That they record the gathered together oral tradition up to that date, so the kind of same oral tradition that Paul was drawing off of, and so they can't be relied upon for historical accuracy, just like as in just reading it says ABC, therefore ABC happened, but you can apply historical criteria, and there's thousands of people who do this to extract information from it. So basically, they're not reliable in the sense that you can just read it and say that's what happened, but that you can get reliable information from them.
Could I ask Drace just a really quick question?
Yep.
The paper that you read by Sean Carroll, was that a 2017? Was it the paper entitled "Why Boltzmann Brains Are Bad"?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if this is gonna answer your question, but I'm gonna try to take a shot. I don't know if I read that paper fully, but I do know I've looked it over a couple of times, and I believe in the paper he argues that the whole Boltzmann brain problem isn't so much a problem that the statistical data rules them out, more so than that the theories that predict them are just not stable theories. There isn't really a way that theory could be true and where somebody could actually believe that it could happen. Where the statistical data does work against Boltzmann brains, the models that predict them are just off the charts, so to speak. They're here be monsters, I guess you could say.
Yep, that might very well be, because it's been like, I don't know, something like a year now since I read the paper. That might well be a point that he brings up. It's just that I remember that in his abstract, he does, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that he argues that the production of Boltzmann brains is less likely than has been previously argued. He does say also what you said, which is that the problem with Boltzmann brains is that they're basically like, for lack of a better phrase, like cognitively destructive in the sense that they lead to like absurdity, right? So like if you have a system that does produce such things, it's bad for your model. But he's trying to argue, from what I gathered and remember from that paper, that actually their production, as classically conceived, is wrong. That it's much less likely that you get a Boltzmann brain than has been previously suggested.
I do think he does make that argument. Yes, you are correct there, as I remember. Yes.
So,
okay, thank you. And so I want to follow up real quick with Jordan, because he was saying that you can't historically trust them, for reasons such as like anonymity and things like that. A further tougher question is, do you think that when the gospel writers wrote, that their intention was to record actual reliable history, or do you think that they might have been more concerned in the production of fictive work for the purposes of conveying moral lessons or moral ideas?
So I think it's we have to be careful whenever we're talking about an ancient source to not project our own modern sensibilities onto ancient sources. And so I think they wouldn't have seen a conflict between saying something that didn't actually happen with it being false if it communicated a theological truth. So I think you can see this in John, for instance. In the Synoptic Gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they record the date of the crucifixion as being on the as being after the Passover, because they have a Passover meal. That's the Last Supper. John, by contrast, they have a Last Supper, but it's not a Passover, and explicitly Jesus is killed in preparation for the Passover. He's killed at the same time as the Passover lambs, because for John, Jesus is the Lamb of God, and that is a very important theological point. So John has changed history in order to report a theological truth. So I don't think that they were intentionally lying. I think if we, and that's just my opinion, I think if you'd gone back in time and found the author or authors of John and be like, hey, John, how come you changed this? He'd be like, bro, you're missing the point. The point is Jesus is the Lamb of God, man. That's way more important, you know? I think that's kind of the nature of these. They weren't necessarily like, if you went back in time, this is what you'd see. It was more, Jesus is the Christ, and this is why, you know?
Yeah, and by the way, it's interesting.
Yeah, see, I
Go ahead, David.
Okay, yeah, and the gospel stories, they differ wildly on who actually made the spices for Jesus. And the gospels, the synoptic gospels, the women go to the tomb after one's Sunday morning in order to anoint the Savior's body and have put the spices in. But it is very explicit in John that Nicodemus does it before he is buried. And when Mary go to the tomb alone, there's no mention of her carrying any spices because, of course, it's already been done. So the timelines do not add up. You can't. They're incompatible with each other.
See, the things that are being said here, I agree with what you're saying. It's just that I have an issue if we really want to say that we can look to the Gospels and, at least the people who suggest that the Gospels should be thrown into the genre of history or historical biography. When you start talking about stuff like this, like the fact that John is willing to change things up because he wants to present a theological point, when Jordan says that, you're missing the point if you're interpreting it that way. And I agree with that very much, but I think that the consequence would have to be that we don't throw them into these genres, that rather what we should be understanding them to be, in essence, is fiction meant to convey a theological point. And I mean, like, I want to give a couple of examples because you guys have already given a couple, but I think that there are other examples as well that really show that this isn't just, one or two examples of changing up, the details in order to present a theology. Rather, I think that this is rampant all throughout the Gospels. And so an example of this that you can find, for example, in Randall Helm's book, Gospel Fictions, there's the story of Jesus bringing the girl back to life or back from sleep. And this is directly mirrored by the stories that you find in Kings with Elijah and Elisha, right down almost verbatim the same exact story. And so, like, when you see that they're cribbing from the Old Testament and using the same stories from the Old Testament and presenting Jesus as a new Moses or a new Elijah or a new whatever other patriarch you want to use, like, when you see this all over the Gospels, where they're cribbing stories or making things up, I don't think it would be appropriate to put them in that genre when you see all the evidence suggesting that what they're really doing is just making this story up for the purposes of conveying a theology and conveying a moral system.
So if I can push
Is
back,
it also not fair to? Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, I don't want to dominate. Please go ahead.
No, but what I was going to ask, a very basic question is: isn't it a fair statement to say that the theology very much depends on the nature of Jesus, that being like if Jesus was a real person or not?
Yeah, but
Honestly,
I mean, I don't think there's a serious case to be made for Jesus not being a real person. But
I agree.
Well, by real, I also mean like doing the things that are attributed to that.
Okay. If by real you mean like miracle working Son of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask George?
Well, just to push back a little bit on that, I think again you have to put yourself in the mindset of the people writing these books, and you're always in shaky ground when you're trying to jump into the mind of someone 2,000 years ago. So take all this with a healthy heaping of salt. But if you think from their perspective, these are Christians who are completely convinced that Jesus is the Messiah. And so for them, it's not fiction to say that Jesus walked on water, because these are things the Messiah did. Or a better example is Jesus being born in Bethlehem. There's very good reason to think that Jesus was actually from Galilee and he didn't go to Bethlehem at all. But for the gospel writers, the Messiah by definition comes from Bethlehem because that's an Old Testament prophecy. And for them, Jesus was the Messiah. These are facts they know. And so it wasn't like, let's make up a story to make a theological point. This is a fact. Jesus came from Bethlehem, and I know this because he's the Messiah. So how did it happen? So I think the line between history and fiction for them is probably blurrier than our modern sensibilities would come to it from.
Okay, so in that case, would you say it's kind of a build your own Jesus, like picking from different parts of
Well, I think especially for Greek for pagan Christians, because the one thing that people antiquity loved is antiquity. If your philosophy or religion wasn't ancient, it was freaking worthless. So it was very, very important for early Christians to tie the religion back to Judaism, because Judaism was old and therefore respectable. And so for them, it was very important that they continually tie Jesus back to the Old Testament.
Which is also why it says that Jesus came to fulfill the law, right?
Which is always why it says what?
Which is also why Jesus says he came to fulfill the law.
Right. Yeah, that sort of thing. But that right there, though, may be an actual saying of Jesus, because Bart Ehrman is a better source than I am on that. But
yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
We go on, but okay.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. That was a little bit longer of a tangent than I anticipated it to be.
Sorry, and yeah, I know that I've been speaking a lot within the last few minutes. After I get a few last points out, I'm going to shut up for a little while. So I want to ask Jordan and Leo, because I'm somebody I'm agnostic with respect to Jesus's historicity, and I just wonder, like, when you guys think that there's no good case to be made for mythicism, have you read the work of the primary mythicists like Carrier and Doherty and Price? Have you considered their work, and if so, why is it that you find it not compelling at all?
You can go first, Jordan.
Yeah, actually, I could pull Carrier's book. I've got it somewhere around here. But yeah, I've read Proving History and On the Historicity of Jesus. I think were the two. So I've read their work. I've read the works of Price and stuff too. Actually, as part of I read them before I read like Ehrman and them, just because they happened to be recommended to me first. And when I read it, I was like, wow, this is really persuasive. I wonder why no scholars persuaded of this. And then I went and looked at the scholars, and I was like, oh, that's why. Because because there's just a lot of things that Carrier downplays or doesn't give enough credence that are pretty damning. For example, the references to James, the brother of Jesus, in the Pauline epistles and also in Josephus. He mentions Paul twice, I think. And it's hard, he mentions James, and it's hard to have a brother if you didn't exist, like an actual physical brother. There's good reasons in the Pauline epistles to think that it is real brother and not some title like Carrier says. So,
could you give me I think that's excellent, because that would bring the conversation further than I've gone, because basically it comes down to Carrier arguing that it's an ambiguous reference because we're talking about fictive kinship, that he's basically contrasting an apostle with just a fictive brother, just a normal Christian would be his interpretation of it. And you're suggesting that there are good reasons within the text to reject that interpretation. So could you give me the reasons behind that?
Sure. So I'd have to pull up the verse to give you verbatim, but basically what he says is, I'm here with these apostles, I'm here with James, the brother of Jesus, and I'm also here with these other people who are Christians, right? And so if brother in this context was just a generic name for Christian, then why would he apply it to James to differentiate him from these other Christians who are themselves brothers? It doesn't make any sense. Not that it can't be used that way. He could have written that way. Sometimes people write in unclear ways. So maybe he just wrote it in the dumbest way possible, possibly. But it's a way you have to torture the text less if you just look at the text and accept it as it's communicating to you. It seems to be communicating that James is in fact the brother of Jesus. And considering that James is mentioned as the brother of Jesus several times by Paul, he's mentioned by Josephus, and then all of the gospel authors also agree, like that's a lot of independent attestation for this fact. So it's a less torturous view of things to say that James is actually a real person and is actually really the brother of Jesus. And that's the trend. It's not so much that you could say there's absolutely no way that Jesus is mythical. It's that it's just unlikely, and there's no real good reason to say he was.
Yeah.
I appreciate that response very much. I'm going to have to go back and look at that particular verse because I don't remember him mentioning other people besides the two. But it's been a really long time since I've read it. So, I mean, like I just remember him mentioning the apostles, and then from what I remember, like he ended the verse by saying that he ended the passage by referencing James as being the other one that he saw. So maybe I just don't remember the details of the passage, and I'll definitely go back and take a look.
I'm quoting from memory, so I could be wrong too. If you haven't read it, I'd recommend Bart Ehrman's book, "Did Jesus Exist?" because he wrote a whole book on it. And he's pretty accessible.
Yeah, I did read it, and one of the things that I know Ehrman has concentrated on, he doesn't like the whole parallels argument to pagan sons of God and stuff like that. And so I have a problem with that, though, because I have a bunch of material written by several different guys. Let me see if I can pull up one of the books. It was written in 2001, and Ehrman is relying on, particularly on, I think it's Jonathan Smith, who wrote in the 90s. And there was a subsequent work after Smith that really went into a deep dive on the whole parallelism thing. And so, like, for example, they argued that Baal was not dying and rising God, that he should just be considered a disappearing God, or if not a disappearing God, that somebody else took Baal's place to go to the underworld. And this particular author, let's see here, dying. And he goes into this in depth and shows that according to the Ugaritic text, which was a more recent find in comparison to some of the other texts that they were relying on, makes very clear that, in fact, it was Baal himself who goes down to the underworld. And the gods do mourn him as dying and even appoint a successor to Baal. And the successor fails. He's not as good as Baal is. And then later on, the gods recognizing Baal's return. So, like, it was... insofar as I have followed this debate so far, it looks like Ehrman on that point, on the parallels with the other pagan deities, seems to be based on out-of-date scholarship. And I'm going to see if I can pull up the book in a second. In the meantime, I'm going to shut up.
So my basic response to that would be, just because there are parallels in the story doesn't mean he was made up, because there was a large trend of Hellenization in the ancient world. Particularly Judaism. So, and you also have to remember that the vast and overwhelming majority of Christians were pagans, not Jews. So they were coming from a tradition of these sort of stories. And so it's perfectly natural that they would fit Jesus, the stories they were telling about Jesus, into the modes and molds that they're used to telling stories about. And so if you see parallels with pagan deities, pagans were telling these stories. So that's
right. That's like saying that there's parallels between Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Therefore, J.K. Rowling is just ripping off and just plagiarizing Tolkien's.
Humans aren't very creative. We tell the same story over and over and over again. So.
Yeah.
So okay. So the first thing that I want to first the source that I'm relying on here is Mettinger, The Riddle of Resurrection: Dying and Rising Gods in the Ancient Near East, which was published in 2001. I agree with you very much that that it doesn't entail that there was not a Jesus the man. However, I would just say that if you do end up showing that a ton of these aspects to Jesus's alleged biography, at least according to the Gospels, is in fact mythical, then it just becomes like more and more of his life turns out to be fictional. And I think that that's at least evidence for mythicism in that sense. And then there was one other point here. What was it? Oh, and the other thing that I just wanted to, this will be my last point on this, is that, it also depends on the nature of the parallel, because, Carrier talks about parallelomania, where you're just finding parallels everywhere. So you could find, for example, certain parallels in Harry Potter if you wanted to with respect to the Lord of the Rings. But it really makes a difference when you're talking about, like, what kinds of parallels are you really talking about here? Are they loose parallels? Are they just you basically like trying to look for whatever parallels you can find? Or are they striking and very improbable instances of commonality such that they suggest some kind of syncretism? And I think based on the research that I've come across, that it is very good examples of evidence for syncretism that you find in people like Baal and Osiris and certain other gods as well. And that'll be my last point on that.
So the argument you're making there is that aspects of Jesus' life, meaning like his miracle works and the things of parallel, those are less and less likely. Therefore, Jesus himself didn't exist. I think it's arguing against the wrong Jesus. Like historians like Bart Ehrman and laymen like myself aren't arguing for the miracle working Son of God. We're arguing for a first century apocalyptic prophet, like all of the other apocalyptic prophets in Judea, who had a following just like all the other, just like John the Baptist and various other, like he was a perfectly mundane person. I mean, he was obviously extraordinary in order to have spawned this religion, but in the context of his time, he wasn't that unusual. And so just because you can use these parallels to show, okay, there was influences from pagans that led to these miracle stories, that doesn't mean there wasn't a person, and it doesn't do anything to argue against there being a person.
Finish. My bad. Finish.
So it's just, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue that there wasn't an influence of paganism on early Christianity, because again, they were all pagans. Like, yeah, absolutely, there was an influence that, like, you could definitely view early Christianity as kind of a mystery cult, sort of in the same thrust of Hellenization. Like, it certainly fits in that context. I just don't think, having read the works of other historians, I'm no longer as persuaded by Carrier. Like, it is a very interesting read, but I think he puts too much weight on flimsy pieces of evidence and then not enough weight on damning pieces of evidence.
I just wanted to add quickly that what you said there, where during his time Jesus would have been rather mundane. We look back now, he seems like this extraordinary person. To me, it does not seem unlikely. I would argue that it seems rather likely that you had some apocryphal apostle or
apocalyptic prophet.
Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't think of the word apocalyptic. An apocalyptic prophet speaking at this time, who ended up dying, and his followers martyred him after his death and modeled a mythological character around him, pulling from other paganistic traditions, and that's why we see the parallels. The parallels are in my opinion, the parallels are drawn between the mythological Jesus and paganistic religions, not with who that person actually would have been. Yes. Yeah. And so to me, I think it's very, very likely. I would almost argue that in some senses, you could say it's inevitable that if they took somebody that they followed closely and martyred him after his death and mythologized him, that they're going to pull from traditions that exist in probably for the sake of appealing to the pagans who existed during that time. If we're coming up with this new story, this new religion, so to speak, if it can appeal to the people that already exist and the systems of belief that they already have, they're more likely to gain followers than if they started with this completely different story, completely unrelated to anything that's ever been heard of, where people are more apt to sort of push it to the side.
Honestly, I think Sorry, go ahead, Immutable.
Yeah, I think an apt analogy might be like when we communicate with people, like if you've ever had to give a talk or something like that, especially to younger people. I mean, let's be honest, right? Like you don't talk to people, using analogies from like even mildly like outdated literature, like Moby Dick or something like that, or like The Old Man and the Sea, or books that are like like 60s, 50s. You use like more modern analogies. You use things that are relatively pertaining to the culture that your time frame is kind of embedded in.
Yeah,
So, I think that's completely rational for people to kind of to adopt symbolism in that kind of scenario to convey whatever message you're trying to convey.
Yeah.
Let me throw some last thoughts out here. I see a rational empiricist wants to say something. He said so in the live chat here. So I'll make this my last flow of thought on this topic. But I agree with Leo very much that the Christians are interested in converting pagans. That's as far as I understand the development of Christianity. Like I have my own little pet theory on the Christian origins, and it is a theory that's ultimately agnostic about Jesus, because it doesn't require anything about Jesus in order to bring Christianity about. Rather, there is like a major interest in converting pagans over this pagans to this ideology for a particular goal or end that I'm not going to get into right now. So the thing though is that Bob Price, somebody like him, would turn around and ask you guys, well then, if it's the case that you just have this mundane guy, then what is it about him that ultimately led to the heavy mythologization of him to begin with? Like if he really is just this Clark Kent, who really doesn't do anything at all that's exceptional, why did they choose him to mythologize? And to go a little further on this, when you read somebody like Thomas Carlyle, he has this book on heroes and hero worship. And by using the same kind of reasoning that you guys are right here, well, there's a bunch of myth, and that could have been applied to this person. So we can just discount all this as myth, but surely the person must have been historical. Using exactly that kind of reasoning, he ended up concluding that, for example, Odin is a historical figure. And I don't think that's, it's possible, but at the same time, I don't think that that's necessary. And so it's for reasons like this that I start to get into, I ultimately end up in an agnostic position, because I don't think on the basis of the evidence that you can really get swayed either way. However, there are still certain other things that I have to look into. For example, the Josephus reference with respect to James, I've covered that a little bit, but I don't remember quite a bit of it right now. I remember Carrier's response, but it's something that is worth a deeper dive.
So real quick, because I want to get the rational empiricist, I'd recommend the open courses thing you can get on Audible. Bart Ehrman goes through all the various reasons. There's textual reasons to think. There's more than just this disappearing myth man. But to answer your question, how did we get, if Jesus is normal, the answer is Paul. Without Paul, you don't have Christianity. But
yeah, I did want to chime in quick just to add some thoughts to that, and then we should let Andrew ask his question. I think it was a debate that Bob Price had with, I'm pretty sure it was Bart Ehrman, and I watched, and he raised the same issue. And I actually think it's a fairly decent point to bring up, that, why Jesus? Why this person? And I think that it was like Jordan said, Paul, I think had a hell of a lot to do with it. But I think it was that he had very devoted followers, and he wasn't just some guy that lived in teaching that this apocalyptic message, and then he ended up, dying of old age. He was. This, I guess you could say that this is sort of my pet theory. It relates to, if anybody knows Paulogia on YouTube, it's along the lines of what he thinks that, Jesus' message started to gain a little bit of traction, and the Jewish church recognized this, and they recognized the sort of blasphemous nature of it, and so they lobbied the Roman state to have him executed. And it was the execution of him, like it is, we can look just, less than 100 years back in history and see that the execution of somebody who has a message, even if it's only starting to gain traction, can lead to that person being martyred. And I think that that's what happened with Jesus. The fact that he was crucified, the fact that he died in such a horrendous way, led his followers to martyr his life, to martyr him, and develop a mythology around him that I would argue, honestly, really didn't get its kick until I think Paul was very pivotal in the development of early Christianity, but. And Jordan, if you know more on this, you're free to step in. But I would argue that Christianity really didn't get a big kick until it was adopted by Emperor Constantine, and the Roman Empire formalized and adopted what became Roman Catholicism. I think that if that had never happened, that Christianity would probably be smaller than Islam is today. It would still be, a player on the stage amongst the major religions, but it wouldn't be the quite frankly, the predominant religion, unless you don't include Catholics in there, which I think everybody in here does. It wouldn't be the predominant religion. So I think it's just the message that he taught, the way that he died, the followers that he had. They wrote stories about him. They started to mythologize his life. This led to the development of a religion. Oral traditions went around. Some guy who was trying to resolve a civil war in the Roman Empire, converted to this religion, converted the empire to this religion. It's the largest empire that existed on the planet at the time, and boom, Christianity kicks off and takes over the world.
Yeah, by the way,
I have some follow-up to that stuff, but I'm going to shut up for the time being and just get in line. I'm going to get in line behind Rational Empiricist. I do have some follow-up, but I'm going to shut up and get in line.
After Andrew goes, I think we should let Immutable chime in, because he's wanted to chime in here for a few minutes.
Yeah, it's all good. Andrew's good.
So, yeah.
Oh, do I go?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to ask you one more thing, Jordan, before I head out and let everyone else here talk for a bit. So a question more related to the debate with Kent you had tonight. Basically, he kind of always brings up this point of the Big Bang being like the dot, for instance, and I want to hear your thoughts on that, and like how you feel when people misrepresent the Big Bang like that, and what you think we can do to correct that, I guess, to start off with.
Well, it's tough because it takes a lot more effort to correct bullshit than it does to spin it.
Yep.
And it often requires a lot more knowledge to correct it. It's very easy to throw out something that sounds convincing to a bunch of laymen. It's a lot harder to throw out something that's actually rigorous. And so it's very frustrating because, I'm not an expert in cosmology myself, but I know enough to address that. But by the time you've addressed that, they've run onto 10 other lines of bullshit. And so while I do... obviously I did this debate, so I think we should try to address it if we can. Part of what I focus on in my podcast is training how to think, what a good source looks like, how to check things, that sort of thing, because that's the only way you're ever going to... You have to cut it off at the source. You have to make it so the audience doesn't say, that sounds good, therefore I believe it. It should be, that sounds good, let me check that. That's the only way you're ever going to win.
Can I add a thought to that?
Yeah, same here.
So Andrew, just to clarify, are you asking about Kent Hovind's, like, the phraseology he uses when he describes the Big Bang?
Yeah, because I think everyone here knows that the Big Bang doesn't actually describe a dot that exploded, quote unquote. So I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on, I guess the phraseology and how we can better correct for it. Or for at least the next generation.
Yeah, the whole idea, the universe, was contained in... The problem is, and you see this problem with understanding the expansion of space-time as well, people view the entire universe as if it's a physical object like a basketball or a pebble or something, and that's just not how to interpret the universe. So when cosmologists talk about the universe being extremely dense and small, it's not like there was this little ball of energy and just a literal nothingness that surrounded it. That's just not. And that's sort of like the thing that you get in your mind, but that's not how to look at it. The other thing that needs to be said is, and I'm going to say this and then I'm going to repeat it and then I'm going to explain why it's correct. The Big Bang is not the beginning of the universe. That is correct. The Big Bang is not the beginning of the universe. The inflationary epoch preceded the Big Bang. The Big Bang is from 10 to the negative 32nd seconds after t equals 0 to 1 second after t equals 0. So it's sort of what occurs. Inflation stops, and then the evolutionary epochs in the universe's evolution from after it stopped to 1 second after t equals 0 is called the Big Bang. So we've actually, and just for a source, and I can put the article in the private chat and in the YouTube chat when I'm done, is from an article written by PhD theoretical astrophysicist Ethan Siegel, who says exactly the same thing, that the Big Bang colloquially might refer to the beginning of the universe, but in terms of the standard model of cosmology, the lambda CDM model, the Big Bang is not the furthest instant that we have even a theoretical knowledge of. It's what occurred after that.
Well, wasn't the term Big Bang used as a pejorative by, ironically, an atheist?
It
Yes.
was used originally. It was used originally to try and shun the idea, if memory serves correctly.
Yeah, because Hoyle, or I guess that's the name, said, "Oh well, based on the model, like he had this weird idea, that it somehow proved God."
Hoyle thought that a lot of people in his own field shared some of the same sentiments that he did, when in fact that was not the case, and the vast majorities of his ideas were incorrect. But he did have one good one.
Just to support what Leo was saying, and this is something that you don't just have to go to atheist cosmologists to hear that the Big Bang is not the beginning of the universe. There are Christian cosmologists who would tell you the exact same thing. If you go to the Cambridge Companion to Science and Religion, in there you'll find a Christian cosmologist who argues exactly this point, and he argues it as well upon the basis of general relativity. He says that the best interpretation of this, because general relativity breaks down at such small scales and high temperatures, that the best interpretation is to look at it as the past limit rather than some ultimate beginning.
Just really quickly, to quote Sean Carroll, who's a PhD theoretical cosmologist and theoretical physicist, the Big Bang is not the beginning of our universe. It is the end of our theoretical understanding of it.
Yes, I like that. I like that quote.
Can I say something really quick?
Sure.
Okay, what I've always found interesting is that is that what the matter we're made of only makes up 4% of the matter in the universe. I think it's called baryonic
matter.
Yeah, thank you. I can never remember the fucking term, but 4% creates stars, planets, and
galaxies,
you, Leo.
Everything. Yep. And
like,
Amelia.
How the fuck is how is that not awesome?
It is awesome.
Oh, it is. It's amazing. Astronomy for a chemist is like the prelude to all the fun shit atoms actually do once you get them in the right conditions. And atoms alone are allowed to demonstrate that the universe is billions of years old.
Aren't there like 12 particles in the standard model that create all of existence?
Well, it depends on what you mean by all of existence. The standard model of elementary particles has 17 particles. There are 6 quarks, 6 fermions, 4 vector bosons, gauge boson, scalar boson, or the Higgs boson.
I was thinking of the quarks, protons, and neutrons, which are made of the quarks, electrons.
So if you're talking all of baryonic matter, that would be 4. Up quarks, no, 3. Up quarks, down quarks, and electrons.
Yep.
That's what makes baryonic matter.
Everything else is there for some reason.
But then you also have the bosons, which act as carrier particles or messenger particles.
Yeah,
which gravity doesn't really seem to have a messenger particle, unless you want to come. Okay, that came out wrong. Unless you want to count, the Higgs boson is a boson for gravity.
Well, it would be a boson for mass, but the Higgs boson is the thing that needs to be understood about bosons is, and just really quickly, the difference between fermions like quarks and leptons, like you've got your electrons, your muons, your neutrinos.
Yeah, I can't remember the fucking names, so go ahead.
Up and down quarks are obviously quarks. The difference between the quarks, leptons, or fermions, and you have bosons is the math that governs them. Fermions would be like if you took a bunch of pieces of paper and rolled crumple them up into balls. You're not going to be able to get them to stack on top of each other. They don't, they're because of volume and everything like that. And this is a classical intuitive description, so it's not literal. But whereas if you have stacks of paper, you can just stack as many as you want on top of each other. That's the difference. Fermions don't like to be close to each other, so to speak. Bosons, they'll hug, they'll kiss, they'll fuck, they'll do all sorts of stuff. The thing with the bosons is, the bosons themselves don't actually mediate the force. The bosons are the perturbations in the fields that mediate the force. Because you have to remember, quantum field theory is,
so in other words,
everything pretty much.
So this is going to be a poor analogy, so forgive me. So in other words, the logic gates of the universe where where information flows through. Again, poor analogy, but
I don't know enough about computer science.
Okay, never mind then.
I just don't.
I mean, I moonlight as a software engineer, but
yeah. I moonlight. Okay, I moonlight as a. Never mind. I won't make the joke.
By the way, I did want to answer Pigs Can Fly's question, and yes, if you're asking, have we witnessed any stars form, like from the initial collapse of a molecular cloud of gas and dust to to a star actually being there? No, but I can give you an article where we have observed steps in that process. The thing is, especially when we're dealing with cosmology, humans simply are not privy to the timescales on which these events happen. So we can't literally watch a star form or watch a galaxy form.
Give it a couple of million years, we will be able to do that.
Argue that we can't infer it from things that we have seen. I mean, think about it. Stars exist in the natural world. Obviously, there's a process that makes them. I mean, that's kind of no-brainer.
I don't know about you, but I'm planning on living forever. So
yeah.
My man, high five.
It's like it's about as ridiculous as saying, well, nobody's ever going to watch Pluto make a whole orbit around the sun, therefore it's not orbiting around the sun.
Exactly. Very good analogy, David. Very good analogy. Yeah. And I'm going to put the article. It's from PBS, but they cite the technical papers that they're quoting from. I'm going to put it in the YouTube chat.
I have a quick question for you.
Go ahead.
Wouldn't you? This is slightly off topic, but wouldn't you want to live happily ever after forever with Amelia Clark?
No.
Wow. Damn.
I would
like to live.
I'd live happily.
Yeah, I would like to live forever, but
any
I'm not with
time.
Amelia Clark.
Wait, hold on. What are the time? I cannot hear anything.
Well,
Why?
I guess that means more Amelia for me.
Well, oh wow, Leo, you got competition. Competition.
I would want to live forever as long as I have eternal youth along with it.
Well, I keep telling you that they aren't going to do that, but you don't believe me, so fuck off.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay, well, read the book.
The singularity is coming, man. AGI.
Just really quickly, Pigs Can Fly. He actually addressed this to Jordan, and he can respond. I just wanted to give my thoughts on it. He says, gravity only accounts for the effects of matter when it has accumulated. However, how would this take effect when helium is a gas and has to be placed under pressure? The thing is, in the very early universe, so if we were to go to about, say, 1 million years after T = 0, so to speak, the clouds of hydrogen would have been so dense that if you were to punch one, it would feel like you're punching concrete. So there's so much hydrogen that, and you have to consider the density fluctuations that existed in the early universe. There's going to be very, very, very slight perturbations in the density of these clouds where they're slowly going to start accreting matter, and that's going to make them denser, which allows them to accrete matter more quickly, and then they get denser and you start to get a runaway process, and then eventually you get a region that collapses into a protostar, accretes matter very quickly, and over the course of tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, you eventually get the formation of a protostar.
So just to bring it down to a layman's level real quick, the statement that gravity only describes when you have a lot of matter together is wrong. Like the great scientist and philosopher Weird Al put it best when he said, "My pancreas attracts every other pancreas in the universe with a force proportional to the distance between them, or inversely proportional distance between them." Mm-hmm. So if you have two atoms, they're under some kind of gravitational force with respect to each other. It may be very small. It's probably going to be swamped by other forces, but it's not like you get to a certain thing and then boop, now gravity happens.
Exactly. And to add on to that, like if you could picture the sun is not just like, obviously it's moving through space, but let's take it being stationary relative to the rest of the solar system. It's not just there. It's moving like this relative to the gravity of all the other planets that are also tugging on it.
Well, I mean,
the sun is pulling. I think he's also pulling the flat Earth thing, where he thinks that vacuums suck gases.
Yeah,
that's not what vacuum means in physics.
No. Vacuum suck. Okay. People, when people think of a vacuum, they think of a vacuum cleaner. Obviously, you guys know this. Yeah. But why? Vacuum just means there's nothing there.
Nothing there. Yeah,
I'm saying if vacuums suck, I'm taking my pants off before I go to space.
Like I remember watching a YouTube video. Oddly enough, about Freddy. Like the Five Nights at Freddy's. Long fucking story, and they actually mentioned the vacuum and how virtual particles appear in and out of existence. They split, but then they cancel each other out. So it's like I really need to go back and watch that video. But the way he explained it,
fluctuations.
What?
Vacuum field fluctuations.
Yeah, it's like you have a vacuum. You have a vacuum that there's like nothing there, and then virtual particles appear seemingly out of nowhere. They split, and then they collide and disappear. Like that. Literally, that happens like all the time.
Vacuum fluctuation, well, I should say vacuum field fluctuation. So a vacuum field is just a quantum field that is at its lowest energy state. Like if you could take all of the possible matter and energy out of a defined region in space-time, you wouldn't be left with a literal nothingness. What you would see is, and you have to take in the quantum mechanics and you're making measurements. So you would measure that field at some time t1, and then you go and measure it again at some time t2. You'll notice that the structure of the field will be different. And it will be different at time t3 and time t4 and time t5 and time t6. So what you get is that field of energy is fluctuating. It isn't just static. It's fluctuating, and we can represent that intuitively as virtual particles coming into existence, annihilating, and their energy being conserved by that vacuum.
Well, this might be a stupid question because causes don't really have a significant use in quantum mechanics. But the cause of those vertical particles is the self-excitation of the field?
Technically, yes. The fields... So quantum fluctuations, I think, are more a result of the fact that most fields interact with themselves. So if you...
I'm going to harp on this to death.
What?
Oh, boy.
Go ahead.
I think he said I'm going to harp on this to death, right?
Just okay. Let's just get through this answer and then we'll let Trace talk.
So the thing is that if you could picture, a coordinate space, and just picture like a matrix. You got a 4x4 matrix. Some of the numbers, let's say 4 of the numbers are 0, and all the rest of them are some positive non-zero number. That's essentially what a quantum field is. It might have 0 energy in places, but in other places it doesn't. And then when you you measure it at a different time. You take the same 4x4 matrix, and some different values are 0, and then the other values that were 0 in the first one are now some positive non-zero integer. It's fluctuating. The field is fluctuating through self-interactions. You can't get that field to just be at 0 energy all over. It doesn't work because of the self-interactions that result from quantum field theory.
So before Drace goes, unfortunately, I do have to head out and get something to eat. But I just want to say thanks for having me on, and it was a pleasure meeting you, Jordan, and conversing with you. So
yeah, and Andrew, thank
have
you
a
so
good night,
much.
everyone.
Andrew, thank you so much for being here. We had a great talk. That being said, I am feeling really tired, so I am going to start wrapping things up. That being said, there will be an open mic tomorrow. I am debating on Tangelo and Philip Williams on Standing for Truth's channel on the topic of Noah's Ark, whether Noah's Ark has been found. So that's going to be at 8 p.m. tomorrow on Standing for Truth's channel. And of course, open mic following that debate. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that bell notification down below to be notified of future open mics. Any last words, anyone, before we go?
I do think Drace wanted to say something, but I think there's a bit of a delay, so it might be a couple seconds before he starts speaking.
Yeah, I am on a delay. It might have just improved, but I apologize for that interruption, Leo. It was silent when I started talking, and I realized that you were still talking because of the lag that I'm experiencing. So that was my bad. So this will be my last point on this, and then we'll wrap up. And then if you guys would like to continue the discussion after the broadcast ends, I'm all up for it. But I want to go back to that Galatians reference, because I thought that was a good point Jordan brought up, that if there were other people there, why didn't he describe them all as Lord's brother? And so I'm here right now at Galatians 18, where this starts, and he says, "Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. I assure you before God that what I'm writing to you is no lie." And then he goes off to a completely different town and starts and doesn't mention anybody else. He just he says in verse 22, "I was personally unknown to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only heard the report. The man who formerly persecuted us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy, and they praise God because of me." And that's where it ends. So he doesn't mention anybody else there, just those two people.
Well, he's contrasting James to the apostles, who would also be brothers in Christ. So same point.
Okay, does anyone still want to continue to talk? Because I could just, unless everyone's tired, I could.
I'm down.
Yeah, and right after I end the broadcast, I'll probably head off to bed. You guys can still keep talking, even when
that's true.
After I end up the stream, so feel free to keep on talking. But I am really tired, so I am going to wrap up right here.
Bye.
All right. And everyone, see you all tomorrow. Feel free to come to the debate and definitely come for the after show. It's going to be it's going to be a wild night tomorrow night. That's for sure.
Let's see if Angelo lasts more than 5 minutes during the next after show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't count on it.
Yeah.
That man, never mind. I shouldn't talk.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I am out.
All right.